Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 16th annual um, award ceremony for the
Hi,
John
Steve.
Jay. Hi, can you all hear me? I think I'm on.
Yes.
Yes. So we're doing something special to end our symposium this week. For the first time, our 16th annual ceremony for the John J. Guggenheim H.F. Guggenheim Awards for Excellence in Criminal
Give me a
Justice
sec.
Journalism is going on virtual. Joe, if you can turn yourself off, turn off your audio. So what we're going to do is first introduce the concept of the awards. It's going to be about an hour, hour and a half event, and it's technically going to be a little bit of interesting because usually we do this, as you all know, in person at a gala dinner, and we don't have that gala dinner. We don't have our venue, but I think it's going to be just as interesting. We have a great guest speaker today, and we have all our winners together. And we're also going to end it with what I hope will be a roundtable to discuss some of the issues that we've talked about in the past 2 days, with a special focus on media coverage of the police. So it'll be about a half hour or so. We'll have you all on the round table and give you spaces to speak out and to ask questions as you need to. So let me start without any further ceremony. Our annual ceremony honors the best criminal justice writing in both series and single stories. It includes projects, it includes broadcast projects and online projects. And this year, as in past years, the quality of the submissions and the writing was tremendous. It's been quite a year in criminal justice, and it's also been quite a year in justice writing. The quality of the winners has been quite incredible. And I first want to bring on Joel Wallman, the project director of the H.F. Guggenheim Foundation, for a short introduction and welcome to our prize winners. Joel, if you turn yourself on, welcome.
I've turned myself on.
You've turned on.
Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, all. In the unlikely event that there is anyone present who didn't hear my colleague Dan Wilhelm's remarks yesterday morning at 9 a.m., I'll just tell you that our foundation, the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation, is dedicated to a mission of supporting the production of knowledge about the causes of violence and to disseminate that knowledge. Now, most of that effort consists of grants to individual scholars, but we support this meeting, which is an annual event, and these awards, because we realize that people outside of the academy, including policymakers, form their understanding of crime and justice issues, including violence, to a great extent on the basis of what journalists produce in print, online, on TV, and on the radio. So if we can assist journalists who work on the issues that we care about to do that work better, then we're pursuing our mission. Now, the journalists being honored today have been chosen because they're doing this work in an exemplary way. It's especially good to see that, as has been true in past years as well. Some of the stories being recognized today resulted in the drafting of legislation intended to prevent the ills that these stories document. So we commend all of today's honorees and encourage them to continue to contribute to the public agenda in this important way through clear-eyed, undaunted investigation of things that matter. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you, Joel. So one of the reasons that we call these awards in effect, the Pulitzers of criminal justice journalism is that there's no other award nationally that really honors specifically justice writing and justice investigative reporting on its own as a niche. Many of the award winners in past years have gone on to win Pulitzers for the same, which we're of course thrilled to have happen. But we feel it's been important and has been important over the last 15, 16 years to make a special point of the work that criminal justice journalists are doing in a landscape, as I don't need to tell you, that's increasingly difficult for the media these days. Layoffs, closing of papers, outlets merging and disappearing. What's remarkable about the criminal justice field in journalism is that so many young people are still going into it and still eager to do really good work in it. And that's exemplified by our reporting fellows who we chose for this year's symposium. Usually we have about 30, 35 fellows. This year we have 55, which is really an astounding record. And it says a lot about the interest that people have in an issue, of course, that's front and center in our national agenda. But criminal justice journalism has gone a lot further than just the old courts and cops kind of writing that the older folks grew up with. It's now all-encompassing. It thinks of justice in a lot of different areas, whether it's police or corrections or education or environment. And we try to follow that and pursue it, stimulate it, and encourage it. And we obviously expect that a number of our fellows will go on to produce really fantastic work out of this week's conference, and maybe some of it will be prize-winning work. So what I want to do here is introduce our winners. But before I do that, I wanted to have a special shout out to the folks who made this award possible again this year and the symposium. First and foremost, pride and praise goes to Ren Longno, who is our prize administrator. So Ren, just turn on your video for a moment. You don't have to say anything, just say hello. There you are. Hi, Ren. She's probably surprised, but without Ren, we could not have put this all together. So a big thank you, Ren, for your work this year. I also want to shout out to our jury this year. I don't know if all of them are in our attendees rooms. I haven't checked that yet, but to make it a lot easier, I'm just going to say their names. You've seen some of them already during the symposium. Alexa Capolotto, who's the associate professor at John Jay College. She's a former enterprise editor at in San Diego, who runs the media program here at John Jay. Joe Dominic, who you've seen as a moderator in our program this week. He's associate director of the Center on Media, Crime, and Justice. There he is. Ted Guest, who's the president of Criminal Justice Journalists. I saw him in the program earlier. I don't know if he's there right now. Anne Charlotte Gibbons of The Trace. Caddy Gray, who's a contributing editor for the Crime Report and a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, formerly from Newsday. Kyle Hopkins, who of the Anchorage Daily News. I don't see him. I'm not surprised, considering the time zone. He won last year's John Jay Journalism Prize in the series category. Mark Obi, who you've seen this week as well as a moderator, who is a criminal justice solutions specialist at the Solutions Journalism Network and a former executive editor of American Lawyer. His bio is in the larger bio sheet that we have on our website. Topher Sanders of ProPublica, another former winner, not last year, but he's won several prizes in our journalism competition. So thanks to you all for an amazing amount of work. I know it was particularly hard this year. We had a great number of submissions, and it was a close call, as I understand it, from many of them. So let's proceed to our winners, first in both categories. The first category is in our single category, and the winner was Mississippi Today, who worked with the Marshall Project to do an astounding report. And I'm going to put that on screen in a second, if I can. If I can find it. I'll have to try again. It doesn't actually appear. Hang on. Well, that's a shame. Should be easier to do this than not. But it's not. Let me just see. Bear with me.
Hey, Steve, if you give me 2 minutes, I can bring it up for you.
I see it. Okay. I'm going to bring it up right away in a second. Here's our first winner. So the Marshall Project and Mississippi Today produced a fantastic piece called Think Debtors' Prisons Are a Thing of the Past, Not in Mississippi. You can look at it and see the entire story yourselves in the link on our prize page, which we'll send you in a second in the chat room. But I first want to bring up our two winners. First, Anna Wolfe. Anna, we can get you on screen.
You'd think I'd be more well versed in Zoom at this point.
There you are. How are
Hi.
you, Anna?
I'm good. How are you?
Congratulations. So
Yes,
at the same time as
so
you're
much.
speaking, we're going to put on your award. This is technically nifty for us. There you go. Okay, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored and so humbled. So I'm a poverty reporter with Mississippi Today, and I co-reported this investigation with my colleague Michelle into restitution centers, which are these modern day debtors' prisons where people are held for indefinite lengths of time, where they work until they pay off all their debts from past criminal convictions. And I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about how this started in kind of an inconspicuous way. I got a call from a longtime source back in 2018 who just wanted to tell me about his friend Dixie. She was a woman who was a state prisoner living in a correctional facility, but was working at McDonald's during the day. He was concerned because he hadn't been able to get in touch with her. They're not allowed to possess cell phones in the jails, obviously, and he didn't know if she'd been receiving the packages that he was sending her. She had complained earlier to him about her treatment, that they kept pulling her off of her job at McDonald's. And because the correctional officers were intercepting all of her paychecks while she was there, she was worried that they weren't recording her earnings properly. So I remember I was on a lunch break when I got the call, and I ran back to the office and I pulled Michelle aside because she was our criminal justice reporter at the time. I was like, "Did you know that the state prisoners are working at McDonald's?" And she didn't. She was not familiar. And when we started calling around, we didn't find many other people who were familiar with the practice. So we started going to McDonald's, where we found Dixie, and she told us how she got there. A few months earlier, she had been arrested for failing to check in with her PO. She was on probation. She had struggled with addiction in the past, and her initial crime was actually 4 years earlier. She was charged with malicious mischief for one night when she got drunk, she punched out someone's car window. And because of that, she was ordered to pay a few $1,000s in restitution to the person who owned the vehicle. But instead of sending her to prison after she violated probation, a judge sent her to the restitution center, which are basically prisons on the same campus as the women's prison. And people there are treated all the same as inmates. Most everyone actually that we found got to the centers on a probation violation, not like an initial sentence. So when Dixie got there, she was placed in a job at McDonald's where all of her earnings were taken by the correctional officers. $330 was taken out every month to pay for room and board at the jail. And I think that's when we figured out the real issue. And kind of like how we knew we had a big story was when she explained that not only was she imprisoned and had no choice but to work at McDonald's, but she also wasn't going to be released from the facility until she earned enough money at this fast food restaurant to satisfy all of the restitution and court costs. So she wasn't given like a sentence, and because she kept getting pulled off the job, her earnings weren't consistent. So she really had no idea when she would be free. And yet, like, if she could have paid, or if she knew someone who could have paid on her behalf, she would have been released. So you really only end up there if you don't have money. I hadn't covered prisons extensively in the past. That was more Michelle's beat. But because of this, we found that really the story was like kind of the perfect intersection between poverty and criminal justice. So we talked to over 50 people who went through the program, and their personal stories, the things that they were experiencing sort of fed into a whole multitude of facets and problems with our justice system, like, you know, people's individual economic opportunity and social services. Dixie actually had a daughter that she was separated from during this time as a result of all of this. Like, what she really needed was addiction treatment and therapy, and they kept putting her in these classes, these alcohol and drug classes at these correctional facilities, but they really just amounted to doing like some readings and filling out worksheets like you would get in grade school. So it's been about 7 years since her initial conviction for malicious mischief. And in that time, she's just cycled in and out of these correctional programs. I actually messaged her yesterday just to see how she's doing. And she just finished her last stint at the state prison in December. But she's actually still on probation, so she could still get picked up today if she violates. So I think it was important for us not to take for granted that these systems are like rational and logical and the best that we can do for people, and to always question the status quo. And I'll let Michelle talk more about how we did the reporting.
Thank you, Hannah. Michelle, you want to put yourself up on screen?
Yes. Am I here?
Michelle.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm grateful and honored to be here with y'all this evening, and I'll pick up where Anna left off and talk very briefly about how we found sources and gathered data in our reporting. So getting a hold of people in the restitution centers was both quite easy and really difficult, which spoke to the very nature of the program. The folks incarcerated in the centers, as Anna said, weren't allowed to have phones, and reaching them by prison phone was pretty hard, if not impossible, because of their work hours. But we could walk into any number of random fast food restaurants in town and either talk to someone working there who was incarcerated at the centers, or who could point us to someone who was. So we started from that first McDonald's, and we hit up job site after job site, auto repair shops, fried chicken places. We left business cards and interviewed workers in little pockets of time on their breaks, or we waited after their shifts when they were hanging around in the back of the restaurant waiting for prison vans to take them back to the restitution center. Sometimes their bosses didn't mind us being there. Sometimes we purchased tater tots from Sonic or coffee from McDonald's and tried to buy ourselves a little time. And often their managers said we were getting in the way and we needed to leave. So when something happened to someone, they paid out all of their fines and fees and got to go home, or they got fired and had to get a new job, or they got sent back to prison for breaking too many rules, we'd have to piece together where they went by, casting about and interviewing their old coworkers, or hoping that they'd kept our numbers and remembered to call us when they got out. And so all of the shuffling around was also captured in the records we were looking for. Turns out no one was keeping track of these people, not even the Department of Corrections, whose job it was. We wound up having to build a database by hand. We put together sentencing orders for more than 200 people in the center on one day in time. And when we asked the OC for these court orders, many of the ones they sent us were missing information or rendered totally illegible by the copier. And that meant we ended up spending hours on the phone sweet-talking county clerks to find dozens of those orders. We then handed her the data, like what fines and fees people owed and when they were sentenced for, to get pretty simple but crucial information: how much people owed and how long they'd spent locked up in these jails. The variation in the orders, like how the judge's wording meant you could be in the centers indefinitely or for a set period of time, gave us a lens not into just the program, but also into how the patchwork system of justice operates in Mississippi at large. For example, if we couldn't make out what a judge wanted DOC to do because the sentencing order the county had faxed over to DOC was impossible to read, how would the folks working at the prison know what the order said? And when we went looking for more data, like when people were moved in and out of facilities, we tried to cross-check it with the interviews and records we already had on hand, only to figure out that they often totally contradicted each other. That might seem like run-of-the-mill bureaucratic incompetence, but these numbers down to the penny meant a lot for the people locked up in these centers. It dictated when their victims would get repaid and when they themselves could go home to their families. We figured out that the state wasn't keeping close tabs on their cash to the point where one corrections officer was embezzling the near minimum wage earnings of residents for a period of time. So it made a lot of sense that people we talked to were constantly suspicious about where their money was going, especially since they were never allowed to handle it themselves. And through all of this, talking to people who'd been through it, were currently going through it, and even the people who hired them, we learned how deeply neglected the program had been over time. It just sort of started in the 70s and become ingrained in what people's understanding of normalcy was. So that if you lived in the Mississippi Delta, you could just drive on up to the Greenwood Restitution Center and pick up a couple of guys to help you out during deer season or to do some yard work for the day, or that if you walked into McDonald's, it was completely and totally normal that the person serving you fries was going home to what was essentially jail at night. And that was just how things were done. And that's the sense of complacency that we hope to disrupt with the story. And that's pretty much all I've got. Thanks so much for your time. You're muted, sorry.
Thank you, Michelle. I'd like to bring up Leslie Eaton. This was a co-produced story with Marshall Project, who works with a lot of nonprofits around the country to produce marvelous stuff. So Leslie, if you can come up to the stage, so to speak, the virtual stage, and say a few words.
All right, Steve, my video is on. I don't know if you guys can see me.
We can, yep.
Okay, great. I'm thrilled to be here. First of all, because this is a fantastic award and a huge honor. And also because I get to see the reporters I worked with on this project, which was really wonderful. They are fantastic, and the work that they did, it was just astonishing. I think a lot of you may have heard of the Marshall Project or know us. We've, ever since our founding, have emphasized coverage of criminal justice. That's what we do, everything from policing to prisons and a lot of other things as well. You may not know that we do increasingly partner with local reporters who may have a fantastic story that they think needs telling and could use a little help getting it off the ground and published. So we do, we're not like ProPublica, nothing on that scale, but we do custom partnerships with nonprofits and newspapers and TV stations and radio stations all across the country. Sorry about that. And we we do provide whatever they need. It depends on, do they need reporting heft? Do they need data help? Do they need editing help? So that's a thing that we're working on and have found is like very exciting for us, and we're going to be doing more and more of it in the future. And it is really how I got to spend some time in Jackson, Mississippi with these reporters. And we're just thrilled with the results and with the impact the story has had, and with the honor that you all have just paid us. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I forgot to mention that full bios of the winners are on our conference page and our award page. I think Michael can probably find the bio sheet and then put a link in our in the chat room, and we'll send it out to you as well, so you can see what each of these folks have done. Leslie, Anna, and Michelle. Let me turn to our series winner. And this year's series winner was ProPublica, the entire editorial team of ProPublica for its work, a series of articles called the NYPD Files, as you can read on the page, investigating America's largest police force. A marvelous piece of journalism. And of course, this year, one of our special themes that we covered was policing. So this was very timely for us. I'd like to bring on the screen the winner of this year's awards, who will accept on behalf of the editorial team of ProPublica, and that's Eric Umansky. Eric?
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. Are you interested in hearing some of the backstory? Should I?
We absolutely are. Yes.
Okay.
5
sure.
minutes though.
Oh, I'm on. I understand deadlines and length. Actually, not length because we're ProPublica, but generally deadlines. So I will keep it very brief. Which is this actually began on Halloween in 2019 when my wife Sarah and our daughter in Brooklyn happened to see a NYPD car zoom up the wrong way on a busy street and hit a teenager who was running in the street. And it was very upsetting. We couldn't figure out what happened. I went there afterward at my wife's urging and saw that teenager had actually run away, but there were other teens and actually one preteen who the NYPD had turned their attention to. Seemed the only thing that had connected to the person who had run away was that they were all Black. And I began to follow the scene, and I called the NYPD the next day to again understand it. And ultimately, what they told me was, your wife and daughter didn't see what they say they saw. That, and I'm paraphrasing here, the NYPD said the car didn't hit the kid hit the car, meaning he ran over the hood of a stationary vehicle, is what they said. And that got me curious about, well, if the NYPD does something wrong, if an officer does something wrong, how exactly does accountability really work for that? And so I started digging into that, and the answer, it very quickly became clear, was not very well. And so I wrote a story on that a few months later, actually, because lots of things intervened, obviously, in the world. And we began at that point to get a bunch of tips. It was also during the repeal of 50A, which is the law that had kept police files, discipline files, secret for years. And in the course of reporting, and this was involving a lot of colleagues, we began to get records that had not previously been disclosed. And so we ended up launching an enormous effort at ProPublica that spanned many of our departments. So I'm just going to run through them because it's such a collective effort. News apps reporters, our visual evidence reporter, engagement reporter, researcher, reporters, and our editors for all of it, Henri Covan, Alex Zayas. And, I'm well aware, we're very well aware that few news organizations have those kinds of resources, but it is also something where, we were in a position to make a decision to invest in it. And, I think there's enormous value in doing so. I will also say that none of this would have been possible, not only without the expertise of ProPublica, but there were critical public servants who really helped make it happen by, frankly, being responsive to public records requests. Nicole Napolitano, who I actually hope is here, is one. And this wouldn't have been possible without them being responsive in ways you often don't see in government. And the other thing I just want to say is that, we also, it's not simply records that we got. We obviously did an enormous amount of reporting. And for that, we owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the people who spoke to us, in particular, family members of people who have suffered through traumatic events. I'm hoping she's here, Miss Ellen. This is Ellen Treywick, whose son was killed by an NYPD officer in his own apartment, in Treywick's own apartment, 112 seconds after an officer got there. And Kowalski Treywick's mother has demanded answers and was generous enough to share her story and her son's story. And I think people coming forward like that is, we are very appreciative of it.
Thank you, Eric. And once again, congratulations for a well-earned award to you and your whole team. All the names are listed in our story on the crime report, which is also linked as well in the chat room. So I want to move now to our runners-up, which I always found an awful name. Runners-up. I didn't like it. I never liked second place. A runner-up sounds kind of halfway there. Really doesn't capture the incredible quality of the work that was done, that almost made it to our jury, but just didn't quite make it. But we still felt it important to honor them, and here at our and tonight to really note them, to note the kind of work they've done. The first up, the runner-up in the single story category was Hannah Dreyer for her story called Trust and Consequences. As you can see the description there. I'm going to bring up Hannah and the story. Hello, Hannah.
Hello.
And congratulations.
Thank
It's
you.
yours.
Thanks so much. So I did the media fellowship at this conference years ago, and I just adore this program. So it's a thrill to be here virtually in the company of the winners, whose work is really deeply inspiring. My story, Trust and Consequences, revealed for the first time that the Trump administration was requiring detained migrant children to attend therapy sessions, and then using the things that the kids said in these therapy sessions to argue for their deportation in court. And my reporting focused on the case of Kevin Usada. He was an orphan who fled violence in Honduras, and he trusted in a therapist in Texas. He told this therapist about the violence that he had lived through, the reasons that he had fled his country, the gang that had taken over his house. And the therapist said that what he said would be confidential, but in fact, she turned everything that he said over to law enforcement. And law enforcement then took his words and used them to argue against him for years and keep him detained. So after the piece ran, lawmakers took up this issue, and it led to the end of this practice of sharing therapy notes with law enforcement and of using young asylum seekers' confidential disclosures against them. I just wanted to quickly say how grateful I am to the dozens of ICE therapists I spoke to who took real risks to help me get this story out, and to the Post for making sure the story got told the way it needed to be told. And of course, to Kevin Usada, the man at the center of these stories, for trusting me and trusting a newspaper with what he went through. And thank you again to John Jay College for highlighting and encouraging this kind of super time-consuming, complex reporting on some of the most vulnerable people in this country. Thanks.
Thank you, Hannah. I also wanted to mention that one of the criteria that we ask our judges to look at when they're judging all the entries that come in is not just the quality of the writing and the quality of the reporting and the use of data and the presentation of the story, but it's also the impact that it's made either locally or nationally. And each of the stories that are being honored, that's being honored today, had an amazing impact. You saw at the NYPD files had an immediate reaction from the city, and that's the kind of journalism we think matters, which looks not just to cover the problems, but really solutions as well. So thank you, Hannah. Congratulations. Well deserved. Our second runner-up in the series category comes the other side of the country, from the Austin American Statesman. That's Tony Plahetsky, and he's here with us virtually to, oh, that's not it. What happened to there? Here we go. And he's here with us virtually to receive his award for what was really an extraordinary story. So I'll let Tony tell us about it.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for this recognition. I also want to congratulate the other winners as well, and a special shout out to my friends in Mississippi, friends and colleagues in Mississippi. I grew up in Mississippi and am an alum of the Clarion Ledger, so I know what a fertile ground Mississippi is for great stories. Also a fertile ground for great stories is Williamson County, Texas. A little bit of context about the county. For decades, it has had a flawed system of criminal justice and law enforcement. Much of that has been documented through the years. The county in 2011 actually caused state discovery laws to be changed after the wrongful conviction of a man named Michael Morton. Williamson County appeared, at least initially, like it was on the dawn of a new day in 2017 when a new sheriff who ran on a platform of reforming the county and making law enforcement more transparent. For at least initially, he had a lot of public support. He ran overwhelmingly, and one interesting note about him is that he is a lottery-winning millionaire, having won $52 million in the Texas lottery in 2001 as an Austin police officer. He became sheriff, and one of the things that he did very quickly in his administration was to begin wooing the reality television show Live PD. He actually reached out to the show on Twitter and asked them to begin showcasing his office. Months into their tenure, their partnership with Live PD, residents in Williamson County really began questioning whether or not it was appropriate for their law enforcement, their local law enforcement, to be shown in this way nationally. There were very real questions about whether or not it was appropriate to showcase people being arrested on national television in the moment on what were often fairly low-level minor crimes. It obviously made good television. Live PD ratings were through the roof. At one point, it was the highest rated cable television show in prime time. But around the same time that this community debate was really brewing, in February 2020, I got a phone call from a source who asked me if I was aware of an in-custody death that had occurred months earlier. The person knew only fragments of information, not much at all, but they said that the case was being investigated by Austin Police and the Travis County District Attorney's Office because whatever happened, they told me, culminated and ended in the death of a person in Travis County. So I began working sources in February and learned just a little bit more, very, very small bits and pieces of information about the death of someone I was able to identify as Javier Ambler II. And what they told me really was instantly disturbing, that Williamson County Sheriff's deputies had chased him for a very minor traffic violation, used tasers on him, and that Live PD had filmed the whole thing, not broadcast it, but filmed the whole thing. I began asking the Sheriff's Department at that point, did a number of open records requests. They denied all of them. And in Texas, when an agency, a government agency, declines to release records, they have to get an opinion from the Texas Attorney General's office. Over the next several months, I continued picking away a story, obviously averted with the COVID-19 pandemic. But late May, I did get a number of records, incomplete records, but did get some records due to a ruling from the Attorney General's office that did require the Sheriff's office to release some information. And it did confirm what I had heard initially, that this chase, a 22-minute chase involving Williamson County deputies and Javier Ambler, started because he failed to dim his headlights, to oncoming traffic, and it also did confirm the presence of live PD. I was aware that there was a body camera video of an Austin police officer who showed up at the scene as this was all playing out. A source did allow me to view that video, and it was instantly disturbing. It showed Javier Ambler screaming that he had congestive heart failure, that he could not breathe, and his final words before deputies deployed a fourth taser round was "save me," according to this video. The source refused to give the video to me, so I tried to get it from officials in Austin who are conducting the investigation. They have a long-standing policy of not releasing any sort of video during an ongoing investigation, but for a week, I absolutely appealed to them, told them that it was of an urgent public attention, that public interest that this video get released. And after 8 days of essentially bordering on harassing them, they called me at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night while I was driving to a socially distant outdoor meal and said the video was mine and that they were Dropboxing it to me. And that obviously changed the course of that evening. And in the next couple of days, we were able to publish our initial story on the death of Javier Ambler. Once we did that, as these things often do, the floodgates opened, and over the next several months, we did multiple stories of excessive force involving Williamson County deputies in the presence of live PD, really establishing affirmatively that the presence of live PD made deputies not only use more force, but also that they engaged in more car chases with live PD in the vehicles, in their vehicles with them. Our reporting did touch off instantaneous impact. Within 48 hours of our first story on Javier Ambler, producers canceled live PD. Of course, that by this point, there was a huge national conversation about policing in America. 2 days earlier, the show Cops had been canceled, but live PD was then canceled. And pretty soon after that as well, prosecutors, well, based on our reporting, we were able to determine that live PD video had been destroyed, that the show had destroyed the video of Javier Ambler's death prior to handing it over to investigators. That triggered an investigation into evidence tampering, which did ultimately result in the indictment of the sheriff and the county's general counsel. And in addition to that, the sheriff was defeated. He was up for re-election in November. He was defeated. It was the first time that the county has elected a Democrat to a county-wide office in nearly 30 years. And in Travis County, here in the city of Austin, where the chase ended and where Javier Ambler died, right now, as a matter of fact, there is a grand jury considering charges against the deputies for excessive force, but also more charges for evidence tampering being considered against the sheriff and others for actions that they took in Travis County the night of Javier Ambler's death that led to the destruction of the live PD video.
What a story. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
And there you have it. Those are our 2021 winners. And I hope that those of you listening in among our fellows will be suitably inspired to match them next year in the 2022 prizes. It's a great job for everyone. I hope you guys and the winners stay around. You'll get the actual physical awards, the plaques and the certificates by snail mail. Of course, we would love to hand them to you in person, but consider this all a poor substitute for what should be a real live event. But we'd also like to, in the name of all of us at John Jay, Guggenheim Foundation, Center on Media, Crime and Justice, raise a virtual glass in your honor to all of our winners for this year. So thanks very much. I'd like to move to the second part of our program. usually at our annual dinners, we've been honoring what we call the trailblazer, a media trailblazer, which is someone that it's usually someone in the media related fields who's pushed the envelope to a certain extent in reporting about justice or the public debate about justice reform. Last year we had Alfredo Corchalo, who is the prominent Latino reporter on the border. We've had David Simon. We've had a number of well-known reporters who've done fantastic work over the years. But this year we're not having our trailblazer just because we don't have the space to do it. But we have an amazing guest speaker, and I'm really honored. And in fact, she really would qualify as a trailblazer in most normal circumstances. She's Jill Leovy, whose name I'm sure many of you know. She's the author of Ghettoside, A True Murder in America. I'd like to bring her on screen if we can. Jill, if you could unvideo yourself and show us.
This works.
You are.
I'm trying.
All right. Oh, no, you're upside down. You'd be a bit
You
dizzy.
know what I do about that?
How'd that happen?
I have no idea. I think
I've never seen that
small
before.
members of my household get into this. Hang on.
Where did that?
Video settings.
Chris, have you got any ideas?
Yes, go into video settings, and then in the screen, you should see like a 90-degree counterclockwise turn up around.
Oh, there we go. So sorry about this.
There you go.
There you are.
Perfect.
I hope you're not too. I hope you're not too dizzy. So just to continue the bio, Ghettoside, as many of you know, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and won the gold medal for nonfiction at the 85th Annual California Book Awards. Jill spent 24 years as a reporter and editor for the Los Angeles Times. She's just had a current book out called Haters. Is actually due out in 2022. It's not quite ready yet. Coming out from Penguin Random House. And it's going to be, as she describes it, an account of the rise of cooperation in human civilization and the slow subjugation of petty conflict, which would be really good news after the kind of symposium subjects we talked about this week. So I asked Jill to talk a little bit about the issues of media coverage and policing, but obviously I want her to talk a little bit more about journalism in the era of criminal justice reform. So I'll hand the gavel over to her. Jill, you're on.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, Steve, you and I had talked about this. I might not talk very long because you suggested there would be time for questions. And I think we're running a little late.
We're fine. We're not too bad.
Are we? Okay. Well, let me just say a couple of things. First of all, congratulations to the winners. Congratulations to you, Steve. I've been tuning in throughout the last couple of days, and you are a hardworking man. And this is a valuable thing that you pulled off here. So thank you. This is boring, and I think everyone on board, everyone here is probably on board, but I really think that criminal justice reporting still comes down to the traditional craft. And it is almost like the ultimate test of the reporter's craft. I sometimes think when I see some of the reportings that's done, and even some of the academic work, Steve, is that people forget that when you're talking about crime and policing, you're always talking about things that are furtive, that are hidden, that people are lying about, that people are fighting about. There's just no reason to believe anybody about anything. And it's also really vast and really complicated. And it will, if you go in with any agenda at all, I think it will defeat you. It's the one place where it really, really becomes urgent to apply the old lessons of objectivity and to work the story to the ground and get everybody. One of my pet peeves is seeing people who have committed crimes and sometimes who are incarcerated or interviewed in other circumstances, and no reference back to that crime or, the obvious thing, always find the victim of the crime and get their view on what happened, because it's usually very different than what you'll hear. So things like that. I saw Marty Barron in the New Yorker a week or two ago, and he used the phrase "listen generously," and I thought that was awesome. You've got to listen generously to everybody. They might be lying, but you still have to listen generously to them. And you've got to really work to get inside, which people here have obviously done, especially the workplaces of criminal justice, which they more and more are doing everything to keep reporters out of. You just can't take no for an answer. You can't go to the spokesman for an answer anymore. I think that it's gotten to the point that it takes an argument. I was listening to, was it Chief Garcia of Dallas this morning? And he was saying, it's bad for police. It ends up being bad for us that we don't talk and we don't open up. And I think that's true. It used to be way back when that LAPD's manual said that all officers could speak to the press at all times, with the exception of certain very narrow, restricted legal areas, witnesses, personal information about victims, certain personnel information. Beyond that, if they spoke to their jobs and they told the truth, they were allowed to speak to the press. And I always thought that was much better for the police than the way they do things now. And so it's got to be fought for tooth and nail. I think that, it's a great big elephant, and we're all blind men, right? Everyone's got a blindfold on. So it's really important in criminal justice to know that every single person, all the experts, all the academics, all the activists and advocates, all the people inside the system, the police, different officers in different departments, that they get their own little tiny piece of it. We all see our own little teeny tiny piece of the elephant. And so you really do have to weigh people equally. And the other thing I don't see a lot of, and it's super hard, and I would love to see more journalists excavate in areas that academics, I think, have really failed to excavate, and that is in the history, particularly the 20th century history of policing. It is really, really important to know that backdrop. Steve, you and I were talking about the Rodney King case in 1992, where the journalistic work on the beating later revealed that the cops who were hitting Rodney King with their batons had been trained to do that as a alternative to the chokehold, which had just been eliminated in the LAPD. And so it was sort of this case of reforms clashing upon reforms. And it's really important to know that. I recently, for something else I was writing, went back to see the trends of cops being prosecuted for crimes in California, because you always hear that, cops are never prosecuted, blah, blah. And I just found so many cases going all the way back to the 1940s of cops being prosecuted for crimes every single decade all over California. I could not find a trend line, and I had to say, wow, I really don't know this area. I don't know if what I've heard is true. So it's almost like a super challenge for all the stuff as a reporter. To me, criminal justice is where it's at, because it's so complicated. It requires such a bearing down on all of the old craft skills that we all believe in. They come to the fore, and you need them. The other thing is I think somebody said this in the surveillance panel that you had, Steve, about things being human scale. And that's really got to be part of journalism on policing. I'm not sure I'm going to say this very well, but all the reporting should really live ultimately in talking to people and seeing things with your own eyes. And of course, data and things have a place, but very important for today's journalists to remember that data is just an artifact of somebody else's system, right? Data is not the truth. Data is the result of some kind of earlier kerfuffle. Someone has decided to keep the data. Some of you from a couple years ago that won a lot of prizes. He talks about being a sociologist for years and years, going into Milwaukee to do his book on eviction and discovering there was no data at all on the most obvious thing that was happening, and he had to make his own tables. And those are the good stories, right? When there's no data, you know you're onto something. Data is an artifact, and it's often not the obvious things in the data that you're looking for anyway. I'm going to wrap up, I think, because I want to take some questions, but I wanted to say how much I enjoyed reading the winning pieces. I want to particularly compliment the Mississippi Today, because I did not know that, and I love that. I love it when I pick up a story and say, oh, wow, this is what they do in Mississippi, and wow, that's pretty interesting. And it also goes to something that I think has been an undercurrent in all the recent controversies in policing, but maybe doesn't get pursued enough, which is that the real horror stories often live in the small stuff. And of course, social media is the most powerful engine ever devised for selecting things that may not be representative of the totality. And so what's happening with people who have been convicted on small check fraud and financial crimes is not something you see a lot in the paper. It was true in Ferguson. Remember that the two federal reports on Ferguson, the one about the shooting was actually very ambiguous, but the one that made your blood run cold was the one about fees and fines in Ferguson, if you remember what the municipality there had decided to do. My favorite scene in there was the woman who came in and tried to pay off part of her fine to get this huge octopus of state oppression off her back, and they told her, no, you can only pay the full amount. You can't get out of the cage, right? So that the bone-chilling stuff often lives in small areas, or even sub-misdemeanor levels of the criminal justice system. I thought that was a great story, and I think if there are no questions, I could say no more things, but maybe.
If those of you who have questions, please put them in the Q&A window and we'll pick them up. But I want to just start out with a question to Jill. Ghettoside is a classic work of reporting. It's considered that now. I mean, that always makes it sound old, but it's classic.
I like that word.
Because it's, it went just behind the normal way of, just if you're covering police, you covered really the streets. And I wonder, how you think people can apply that method or that technique or whatever you want to call it in their reporting for a weekly or a daily paper? I mean, is it possible to do? I mean, not everybody has time or the ability to write a whole book on it, but how do you translate some of that into sort of daily or monthly reporting?
I'm a big believer in man on the street. You just got to do it, right? If you've got enough time on a story, there's got to be 3 days there where you spend all day and you say, I'm going to try to talk to 40 random people, especially in neighborhoods where there is dense and concentrated policing. It is almost always fruitful. In the context of high crime urban neighborhoods, and most the journalists are going to know this, you've got to do it separately. I always really separated by weeks and sometimes months, the times when I was riding along in police cars and the times that I was spending walking the streets and in people's homes, because you don't want to be seen with the police and then try to interview people. The relations are such that can distort reporting. But it's just really a matter of talking to everyone. I actually think it's the opposite. I see very few ordinary, in LAPD would be called the P2, your low level patrol officers interviewed about their jobs. And I know that's an access problem. Even a lot of the departments, even if they allow ride-alongs, it's going to be with a sergeant. By the end of Ghettoside, I had a no sergeants rule. But it's important to talk to the people. The organizations are just full of conflict. The people you're talking to at the police department might totally disagree with the people in the next office who are closer to your story. There were certainly factions among officers where some thought one way, some thought another way. It's really important to get, like I said, to get inside workplaces, to get employees of workplaces. It's a really hard thing to do in journalism today, but crucial. And most people, when you get into the nitty gritty, how do you do your job and what is going on here will be revealing in one way or another.
A follow-up question from someone who's an anonymous attendee says, how would you approach researching and writing Ghettoside now in the post-George Floyd era?
I say the last part again. I'm so
How would
sorry.
you approach researching and writing Ghettoside now in a post-Floyd era?
Well, I'm not sure that I would do it terribly differently. You know, that there have been a lot of police controversies. There were big police controversies while I was writing Ghettoside. It's funny. I just pulled this up. I'm sitting in my office. I just pulled this up, not because I'm so on top of things, but because it fell out of another book I was trying to get today. It is Violence in the City, a report by the Governor's Commission on the Los Angeles riots. It's got really nice yellow paper. It's got a letter to Governor Brown, the first one, December 2nd, 1965. And if you flip through this, you could take paragraphs from it and you could put it in newspaper stories today and no one would notice. There's a section on how they need to improve community policing, how they need to improve police oversight, how the problems are systemic. It's all here. And along with nice pictures of the riots. My experience of covering LAPD was that we had, protests and controversial cases probably every 3 years for all the time that I was there. The case that was being investigated while I was researching Ghettoside was a case where some of the officers from the division I was in had shot a 2-year-old hostage by mistake during a SWAT standoff. And it's not to say that each of these aren't distinct and that circumstances around the Floyd case aren't distinct, but do remember Freddie Gray, do remember Ferguson. There's a little bit of we're a little bit caught in a loop on these things. And I think that's actually really worth contemplating when you cover policing. It be really relevant. I was thinking with the Austin Statesman story that had been you and I talked about this, Steve, that had been a very controversial issue in LAPD decades ago, and they actually had a written rule saying no reality cop programs were allowed, and that reality programs were never permitted after that to film in LAPD. They had gone around that circle already, that reform circle.
Yeah, it's been a recurring theme today that
ahead.
we've been through all this before. I mean, it's kind of depressing in some ways.
Right. I mean, Ghettoside is about street violence. And actually, as some of you know, as I see that Rick Rosenfeld is here, the numbers are looking really startling and really bad from 2020. I don't know if that'll turn out to be. And they were bad. Ghettoside came out in 2015. In 2016, there was a lot of talk of American carnage in the election, and people were fact checking and saying that, crime was not significantly up. Well, deaths for Black men in Southern California were up by 30%, I think, for the 20s and 30s group that year. So that issue of concentrated homicide in America is still very, very much with us, and I think actually maybe has.
No, we've got a bad connection there. Can you hear?
Oh, did you not hear me?
Yeah. Hi.
Are you? Oh, yeah.
No, we're losing you a little bit. Can you hear us? Can you hear
Yes,
me?
I can hear you now. You froze for a second.
Okay, so there's another question here from Mark Obi, who says, much has changed in the policing debate since Ghettoside was published, but its central point remains true, that people most in need of help get too much bad policing and not enough good policing. How has your outlook evolved on the prospect of change since then?
Well, I'm not a writer who's seeking change. I do think I'm a real believer in descriptive writing and journalists just documenting and descripting. I'm a passionate believer in that, actually, and I resist the idea of being an advocate. I think that the surveillance stuff is very, very concerning. The tendency towards robo-policing and electronic surveillance is fundamentally anti-law. It goes against any effort at genuine law building. Surveillance is about pre-crime. It's about predicting. It's about spreading the net wide and hoping that you catch somebody. And it is the very opposite of what I talk about in Ghettoside, which is reactive policing. And also, other people talk about this better than I do. The idea that there should be no superhuman forces involved in some ways. Part of a democratic process. The process part is essential. It is a human process of people getting together. What is a homicide investigation? People getting together and interacting and giving testimony and saying, this is what we think happened. Here is an adversarial court system where we can hash this out and kind of come to an agreement about this conflict, how it ended and what happened here. That is part of democracy. It should not be done with machines. And I think as someone pointed out earlier today, there's a real temptation because it's cheap and easy. It's cheap and easy to just surveil everybody. You could, and I think your ACLU guest earlier talked about locking everyone in solitary confinement. How about just following them around with a camera? Authoritarian and oppressive states control crime very, very well, and tend to have very low homicide rates. And that is not the game. The game is to find a way to deal with homicide through democratic institutions. So I think that's a big thing going on right now.
You don't sound optimistic.
No, I think that actually people are really, really confused about this. Even people who in other contexts think they're speaking for progressive causes. I think that I actually think body cameras raise a lot of questions about surveillance and about how you're doing investigations. If you are eliminating all possibility for a witness to come up on the street, as I saw 1,000 times in South Los Angeles, and say, I'm too scared to testify, but I've got to give you a tip on who did this because I don't want this happening in my neighborhood. If you've decided to eliminate that, that is something that affects the process and the humanness of the process. And I just think that there's a philosophical problem about the nature of law that is not being grappled with. It's not just, oh, does this work or not? It's like, what is law? Law is process. Law is human beings coming to an agreement about something that happened in the case of criminal law, and we are forgetting about that.
So
And
we have a
witnesses
little
are
bit-
important. It's important
Mhm.
that juries and witnesses are the essential people involved in a homicide investigation, right?
So we have a little bit of time left. I don't know, we have over 50, 60 people now on the, in the webinar. And it's always difficult technically, I think, to do an actual roundtable, which I was hoping we could do, but I wanted to just maybe arbitrarily, which I've done sometimes, is pick some of the fellows who've been with us for the entire conference and get some of their comments and maybe questions. I'm thinking I might want to go to, I'll give them fair warning, of
Steve.
course, before I pick them. Yes, Joe.
Yeah, I'd like to ask
Oh, go ahead, and I'll pick somebody.
a question. Hi, this is Joe Dominic. How you doing? I came away after reading Ghettoside, feeling that if the LAPD, resources and manpower into truly trying to stem violence in a sensible way, i.e., like greatly improving homicide detectives and make them far more effective and make it possible for them to be far more effective. If they spent as much time doing that as they spent constantly trying to reduce crime by using traffic stops for every young black guy driving a car, that would be much more useful and effective. Having observed that, what do you think?
Well, I mean, Ghettoside talks is about that idea that reactive, after the fact, wait for a crime to happen and then solve it is really underrated in the national criminal justice conversation. I think it's important, and I think it builds law. It is not simple, though. None of this stuff is simple. And when things, often in law enforcement, particularly when things seem messed up, it's because one thing is trying to solve another problem that's underneath it, and that, came out sideways. There's usually 3 or 4 things going on. They probably wouldn't be as effective in, sometimes when there's a retaliation cycle, and I saw this in 77, there, 7 people would die in 2 days, tit for tat shootings, the same gangs. It's difficult.
Yeah, but there's things that can be done. I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say that they have tried to address that with the gang, reducing gang violence through using former gang members. So that has been useful.
Well, I'm talking about investigations. When you're trying to get ahead of that and people are actively plotting, and you're trying to use some of your stops and probation searches to get information on the crime, you end up being on this, it ends up being a very blurred line about when that gets oppressive and when isn't. But the alternative, which is leaving the homicides unsolved and never getting in front of that, is also problematic. There's a lot of darned if you do and darned if you don't.
I want to go to some of our fellows, and I'm going to pick them arbitrarily. If they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk. But I'm thinking of David Love. You had a couple of good questions this week. Can I ask you to come on screen? I'm going to allow you to give you permission to talk and give us your take on some of the more interesting things that you heard this week and stories you might want to pursue as a result of them, and any questions you might have for Jill. David, are you there? Maybe he's not there anymore. That's a problem with webinars. My second choice to start is Chandra Bazelko. I think she's still there. Chandra, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes, we can.
I don't know if I can get my camera on, but
Yeah, just talk. You don't, unless you want to, we don't have to see you on the screen. But we can if you want to.
do I even have the option?
Yeah. Do you have the option? I don't know. Chris, does she have the option?
I just promoted her. There
Yep.
she is.
Yep,
There
there
you
I
are.
am.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Do
Hi,
you want me to
Sandra.
just ask my last one?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. First of all, thanks to the organizers for setting this up because I learned a lot. But I wanted to know, because the title of the symposium was about criminal justice under the Biden administration, I was wondering if you had reached out to anyone and invited them. And if so, if they had said they couldn't come. I know they're probably very busy with the COVID response, but for a Zoom conference where someone could stay in their office and talk to us. I mean, for someone whose reputation on criminal justice is a little shaky at best, I thought maybe they'd want to do something and put a message out to criminal justice focused reporters and writers.
Yes, we did. The planning for the conference happened just as they were beginning to form their cabinet and their administration, and a lot of them weren't yet confirmed, so we couldn't get answers. And when we finally did get some answers, they couldn't make it. So we did reach out to the administration, but we probably were too early. It's just in that sort of interregnum period between the time of election and the time that they actually take power and take their posts. But hopefully next year they'll have experience under their belts and they'll come to us. We did ask a few people from Congress to join us as well, and unfortunately that didn't work. Even though it's easier, you would think, by webinar, people seem to be overwhelmed by all their schedules. This has been a year of lots of stuff going on. Do you have a question for Jill?
Do I know? No.
Okay. Eddie Burkhalter, are you there? You may not be able to hear me.
I'm here. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Got some problems with my camera. I'm sorry, but I'm here. I do have a question for Jill.
Good.
Hi, Eddie.
Hey, Jill. Question. You mentioned advocacy. You know, I think covering crime, it's often really easy to sort of cross that line a bit. It feels like when you're dealing with incarcerated people and inmates. What advice?
Sorry, I was promoting you. You're now a panelist.
Oh, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You start to say what advice?
Yeah. What advice do you give journalists, to sort of steel themselves from kind of drifting in that line and into that advocacy role?
Don't be an advocate. Don't do it. It is really important to talk to all sides and to accept the fact that it's rarely simple. What is policing? Sometimes I think policing doesn't even exist. What is a police department? It is labor union contracts. It is a set of risk management policies. It is a city council and a mayor with political priorities. It is an employment center. It is, it is a public employee entity. It is unions. It is years and years of accretions of this issue of reform in 20 different directions, right? Police are a reform. By definition, they were created in England under Peel to be a reform. And all they have done since is continue constantly reforming themselves. They are a conglomeration of ideas, conflicting ideas. They are us. You very often see that last generation's progressive reforms become this generation's, oppressive targets. So there's every reason to be skeptical. And I think the other thing I would say, and obviously Ghettoside is all about this, if you have forgotten about crime when you're covering criminal justice, if you have forgotten about crime victims, and I'm not even talking about homicide, which is sort of easy to see the damage. If you're not going to the immigrant owner of the laundromat who feels really strongly that he doesn't want that group of homeless people camping in front of his business, and why he does, you may not be convinced, but you've got to get down to it with that person and find out really where they're coming from and how they feel. And I see a lot of police reporting where either either it's totally gone out the window that that's what police are about, that if you're not all about crime, you're not really looking at the function, or without a serious understanding of how difficult crime is and how painful and how easy it is to say, for one group to say, the group over there should put up with that. But then when you're in that, when you're on the receiving end, it's a really different story. So I think that keeping a focus on crime and always keeping that in mind. I mean, you know, it is terrible to see someone in prison. I've interviewed prisoners, and it is just the fact of being in a cement house and the despair that they project. It is an intense experience. And it's fine to take that in, but it really, really can spin your head a little to talk to extremely sympathetic prisoners and then go and talk to their victims. It can really spin your head. So you have to be willing to take it all in. And that's the advice. But I think it's also what are we here for? I just really believe there's a role for descriptive journalism that's urgent, and that there's a reason to believe in that and stick to it, and to be detached, and to realize criminal justice. I mean, it's an old trade calling for reform in criminal justice. It's been going on for a long time. For every defense attorney turned activist, and they are most of them, there is a prosecuting attorney who is not an activist, because they don't tend to do that. So you got to know both sides.
Thank you, Jill. I want to go to Nana Carey. If she would like to talk. Nana, if you are, I'm going to allow you to talk and say if you'd like to ask a few words. Nana, you're on if you want to talk. Can you hear me? She may not be the difficulty with these roundtables. When we do this live, we can just look people in the face and say, it's your turn. I'm going to try Shabnam Danish is here. Shabnam? Some people may no longer be there. They're on the screen, but they're no longer, they may be listening away from their screens. God knows. If anyone else wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. There's one. I see one there. But I can't tell who's raising the hand. Put your name in chat and I'll know who you are. Marcia, yes. I'm going to put you on 1 second.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey.
Yes, hi.
Hey, thanks for being here, Jill. One thing I feel like I would be so curious to hear you talk a bit about is like just, you know, mentioning like the importance of like man on the street. And obviously there's so much work like on any kind of criminal justice story that just kind of needs to be done in person. And I mean, I'm up in Canada, and even, you know, getting court records here, you can only really do it in person. And I'm curious if you found ways to kind of manage the limitations of COVID. Like, it just seems like so much reporting has kind of gone out the window on this beat.
No, I mean, I'm not doing it now. I'm writing a book where I just read other books all the time, which is totally lame. So I can't tell you how good in COVID. I mean, I can tell you in non-COVID times some things like I love protests and marches. I love protests and marches. Why? Because in most cities, the cops are lined up. They got their riot gear. They're either hidden somewhere with their shields or they're lined up on the street trying to look casual, and they are bored as they could be. They're so bored, and their feet hurt, and they got 4 hours more in the shift, and it's the best time to just walk around and talk to cops about their jobs. So things like that. And then crime scenes, just being on both sides of the tape. And for me, just being there at 2 a.m. when no one else came out, when I was the one person on the double homicide that no one else in the media is going to pay attention to, just standing there at the tape and looking forlorn. With the LAPD, after a few weeks and months of that, most of the homicides squad people would talk to me. They all knew who I was. So just being present, just be there, show up. And, police particularly feel deeply that they're not, that their world is not seen. And so if you show any willingness, I think that on all sides, people who are in the criminal underground feel their world is not seen. So you just have to make yourself present and things happen magically, right? Everyone knows that.
Michael Karlik, I'm going to ask you to unmute. I think you'll be the last one because we're just about out of time.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I have a question that's a little bit different from what we've been talking about the past 2 days. And Jill, I'm not sure how much it fits into the work you did, but here in Colorado, I cover the judiciary, the work of mostly the appellate courts, the Supreme Court, the policy decisions that get clarified by judges. And it's important here because we elect our judges. So people every 2 years are on the lookout for information about judges, whether they should retain them or not, if they're good judges or bad judges. Do you have any suggestions for what I should be looking for, what I should be asking myself in my coverage of the courts?
Well, I'm a low courts person. I love state courts. I love LA had this thing called traffic court. So I don't know much about appellate courts except that the higher you go in the court system, the more comfortable the seats are. In terms of policing, I do think that this is another area that I don't see enough coverage of. Most of the policies, particularly around force in policing, are accretions of case law. There's usually a reason why they're doing that, right? There's usually a reason why they've adopted one crazy judo move and not another. And it has to do with cases that have happened in the past. So if you're covering police, the legal context of use of force policies is, I think, fruitful. And then I don't know. You're covering the state appeals courts.
Yes, state and federal.
State and federal appeals courts. If I were you, I would just as a matter of personal hygiene, I would spend some time in low-level misdemeanor and state courts once in a while and just sit in, get the atmosphere, learn about the people, and understand on the ground level where those cases are coming from. And don't cover them at 30,000 altitude. Get down there in the trenches. There's probably some satellite courthouse in your area where they're just hearing misdemeanors. Just sit there for a day, and I bet you will hear those appeals differently.
So it must have been something I said as soon as I said we were going off the air. We got lots of hands raised. So Jamil Larkey, you're up next. Just unmute yourself. We're ready to go with you.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes. And you can put your, put your video on as well.
Jamil.
Cool. My question is on this notion of sort of reporterly clinical distance. I think increasingly we're seeing in our industry a cleave between younger journalists and more seasoned journalists on this question. Many younger journalists, especially those steeped in kind of critical race theory, are either questioning the idea that old school notions of objectivity are even possible, or others are arguing that this position is unethical. And I think to paraphrase a New York Times Slack message that wound up in a maybe New York Magazine article, someone had posted, "This is our barricades moment. You decide which side of history you're on." So I guess my question is, have you thought about how we circle? I'm trying to phrase this in like as least a loaded a way as possible. And I guess, because it's something that I still wrestle with, and I spend a lot of time thinking about and feel very conflicted by it. I guess I just wonder, do you feel like there's a way to kind of circle that square at all?
I mean, I think if you spend a lot of time reporting, you report deeply enough and you work hard enough, you understand everything is more complicated when you get into it. We all see that. You know, LAPD had a shooting years and years ago. I think it was in the 90s. A domestic violence suspect who had been stalking his preschool teacher girlfriend kidnapped her and drove away with her in a car. And the police were able to stop the car and they surrounded the car. And she was in the car. And the suspect got out with the gun in his hand, hands in the air. And they were going to shoot him. I think actually they'd been exchanged with gunfire. They were going to shoot him. And somebody said, no, give him a chance. And the guy says, I just want to drop my gun. And so the officers who were all barricading the street around him lowered their guns and hesitated for just a second. And that guy turned around and shot his preschool teacher ex-girlfriend and executed her in front of 30 cops. Right? So I think about that when I see how police are trained and how they think about shooting and how they think about force. Obviously, there's lots of other stories that ended in a totally different way, but you know, none of this, you have to be humble. You have to be humble. This stuff is not easy. There are not easy answers. And there are not easy insights. The insights aren't easy. Let the social scientists pursue their theories. There is a beautiful craft here, a elegant craft, a very necessary craft that has its place in these debates. Let us do that craft.
We have Tom McMorrow on next. I'm gonna have to make him the last one because we are running out of time. So Tom, you're on the air.
Thank you, Stephen. Jill, great to, I mean, this has been fabulous. I want to follow up on something Jill just said. It connects to yesterday's Rethinking Probation panel, because it was asked at that time, well, what should journalists should learn about probation? And Jill just made the point, which is so important for all of, to my fellow fellows, a suggestion anyway, that go to court. If you want to know how probation works in your county, in your community, go to court. Go to your town court, your village court, and go on the days when they're calendaring criminal cases. And you will see very quickly how probation works. You'll see people brought in violation of probation, and then you can FOIA the records and you can the file, and you will find out it is what was brought up yesterday, having people on 5 years probation, sort of just waiting for them to trip. You can find out what's going on in your community. So I just wanted to throw that suggestion. By the way, one more thing, Jessa Boudin, it was so great to hear an American district attorney quote Angela Davis. I mean, I was just, you know, just my personal feeling, but it was pretty amazing. And last, I'm sorry, Stephen, to go on, but
no, go ahead.
I just thought it was very interesting that Cornyn's representative, and this is the scary part, you know, because you hear Boudin and the reforms, and it sounds great, but when you talk on the national level, Cornyn's man, Toussaint, said specifically, just think incremental. Do not, and that's really the answer on the national level, unfortunately. Right now, unless things change politically in the Senate, just think incremental, because that's all you're going to get.
Okay, even though I said Tom was the last one, I have to give Caddy Gray, our own Caddy Gray, she's got a great point she just raised in the chat room, so I'd like her to say it out loud and maybe talk. Caddy?
Hi, I'm trying to get my video on. Hey, everybody. Congratulations to the winners. Y'all are so awesome. Every year I'm awed and stunned and taken to weeping by the work that you do in really hard times. And thank you, Jill, for being speaker. To that question, like I don't empirically know, and I don't remember the questioner, the fellow here. I don't empirically know who is saying, and I mean by race and gender, this is our moment to take a side on these issues of race and color and criminal justice. I doubt very seriously that many journalists of color whose repertorial journalistic detachment has historically and continues to be questioned would ever take that opinion. And I don't think that's a generational question. You know, like we do our best work when we do the work and let people decide what they make of the work. But this idea that this is our moment to raise some hell is bad for journalism, and is particularly bad, I believe, for journalists of color and journalists who come from marginalized communities.
Any comments? Jill, anybody else want to comment on that? I can't let that go.
We agree.
Yeah, I don't think it's a generational question. I think the dangers of this moment, I'm a summertime adjunct. I run a boot camp at NYU, which during the maybe last school year, the school year before, the student journalists had a big to-do about something they were pissed at a professor about who was teaching them straight ahead journalism, and asked for him to be fired. And I ended up sending my colleagues, some of whom are younger than me, I'm an old head, a question saying, what's going on with y'all's kids at schools? And they're like, we're scratching our heads. Like, I think our job as journalists is, like, if you're gonna go work for an advocacy journalism organization, do that. You know, make no pretense about that. But don't be in mainstream journalism and try to, taking a position is dangerous. It erodes the credibility of the work. So again, I don't know empirically who's asking this question, but I seriously doubt that even young journalists of color are framing the question in the same way.
Okay, I think with that. No, Jill, do you want to comment? Actually, the last word is over to you. You're our guest speaker.
You get one bite of the apple. Our times are not being documented. History is going by, and you never get another chance. You never get another chance to go out in a neighborhood and talk to 30 people about where their minds are at or what is happening. You never get a chance to witness that thing. I do a lot of historical research now. Boy, I wish there'd been more reporters to really just get down there on the street and say what was happening. This is a big, big job. So you don't have to do anything else, right? You can fill your time documenting your historical period. So thank you.
Okay, well, we'll have to close it right there, but I think I want to thank Jill. I always knew that this is why it's my favorite part of the symposium is our roundtable. Once people get to talking and the ice is broken, we can go on for another day, actually, but we won't. I promise you we won't. But this has been a great 2 days. It's been intensive. I'm glad all of you stayed through, and I hope you got something out of it. I want to have a special shout out to the folks at CMCJ who helped make this possible. Our interns, Michael Gelb and Emily Riley. Obviously, all of our jury, the folks at CMCJ who you don't see right now at the crime report, who are putting their daily crime report out today. And of course, especially thanks again to the Guggenheim Foundation, HF Guggenheim Foundation, for allowing us generous help to put this on, and their patience in doing it online on the web. I hope that next year we'll all be meeting in person. That's my most fervent hope, and I hope that all of you have a great weekend and a great and productive year. We'll be looking for you and your stories over the next few months. So please stay in touch. Go with us. Let us know what you're doing. We'll be in contact with you. Joe Dominic in particular, who's our journalism coordinator for the project, will be in touch, and feel free to call us or email us, send us postcards, whatever you'd like to do. But it's been great having you, and have a great weekend. Thank you again, Jill.
You, Steve. Nice to meet you all.
Okay, so we'll close off now. And a special thank you to Chris Graham again. I almost forgot. Without him, of course, this would not have happened. So, Chris, come on the air and take a bow.
Hey, happy to help, buddy.
Okay, we'll talk later.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone. We're officially closing this the 16th annual John J. H.F. Guggenheim webinar, symposium on crime in America. Thank you all.
Thank you.